the title of this panel is something I can't remember, but it's what does it mean to be digitally sovereign? What does it mean to have digital sovereignty? Thanks, Jeff. We have three great panelists, all of whom I've known for a while. Jeff Doctor from Animikii, Dennis Bumpy Kanalehe from the nation of Hawaii, who the ICI and the summit have had a strong relationship with since 2019, and Zack Frawley from the Assembly of First Nations. The term digital sovereignty is one I've been hearing a lot more recently. I'm going to push over. I feel like I'm talking to, I feel like I have to yell. The term digital sovereignty is one I don't think we really heard 5 years ago, and it's sort of becoming much more commonplace. So I'll be honest, my first question to y'all is, what does it mean? Because I think it means different things to different people, and before we get into the real discussion, just getting an idea of what it means to each of you. Please, Jeff.
Yeah, should I run through my slides first, or just?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I know you all have, Zach, do you have slides? Oh.
No, so I mean, first of all, Scano, Jeff Doctor, Nigioso. Hi, I'm Jeff Doctor. I'm Kaiga, so Kaiga Hono from the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. Fairly privileged to be here today. I do have a couple little slides here that helps answer some of that question from my perspective. I work with Animikii, and let's see, I think I have a little clicker thingy. There we go. So yeah, I work with this company called Animikii. We're basically a digital services agency that is a fancy way of saying that we build websites, custom software, a lot of things to actually build out the more software side of digital sovereignty. We've been doing it for a very long time. I've been with the company for about 5 years. The company itself has been around for about 20, and like we've been doing this since we even had words to really describe what this stuff meant, because it's like something as simple as building your own website is in a way exercising your digital sovereignty, because you're effectively claiming space on the internet that you can do what you can to control, to have like your data up there, to have things that are about you, to tell the world who you are and claim your space on the internet effectively. Like that's kind of what a website is. But then websites can get a lot more complicated these days with what we'll call like web apps, where basically just like more advanced software that's still a website, but it can do so much. So we've really branched out a lot these days into that side of digital sovereignty, is just building really complicated web applications, pretty much predominantly for indigenous organizations, businesses, governments, all that. So I use this slide a lot in pretty much all my presentations, because it's basically a picture of, depiction of manifest destiny. So if you, I'm trying to go through this really quickly, but if you look at like that painting very carefully, you see so many colonial technologies that are foundational to even the internet today as we know it, and what we know as digital. So everything from the telegraph line to even, the mail carriage, and just like this whole depiction of the so-called manifest destiny of colonialism just kind of sweeping across the plains, and the process of elimination and dispossession of indigenous peoples really assumes that like we're not even going to be here anymore, and all these technologies are also part of our history of dispossession. So obviously we're still here today, and so that painting is hilariously wrong, but still has the legacy embedded in those technologies that ultimately we're figuring out how we can take advantage of in our own ways today. So the challenge of this becomes, how do we ultimately avoid the digital dependencies that some of these colonial technologies create? So one of the challenges of anything digital is it's still material. Like digital data still sits on a server, and that server is coming from the earth with all the minerals, with all the hardware, all the things that actually have to create that digital data. It's not just like some ephemeral thing that lives in the cloud. It's a physical thing that also requires people. it will always require people to maintain those data, to maintain that hardware, to do all of the infrastructure work, to make the digital real, will always need people. And not only that, it's people from all over the world. So all of the people to make all of this hardware, to make all of these physical things, to extract the minerals and things from the earth to make this hardware, and the labor to do that comes from all over the world. And so this creates a lot of supply chains that, even though we're creating all these digital technologies that can seem like we have a lot of sovereignty or independence or whatever over, it's still part of a very long colonial legacy of where all these things came from, and all that infrastructure still is tied to colonization today. So this always begs the question, how do we avoid, where we can, any new forms of a digital dependency that basically entrenches or reinforces these colonial relations? So let's say we do get our data back. I mean, where are we going to put them? So this involves things like cloud hosting, or like, do you host on someone else's servers? Do you self-host? All the questions around that, where I'm sure a lot of y'all are real familiar with the challenges of, do you pass off those responsibilities to someone else, or do you do it yourself? And then same thing with software. It's like, are you buying software as a service? Are you buying custom software? Are you buying, are you dealing with open source software? Like, all of these require different relations that potentially create different dependencies. Same thing with building your own custom software. You're not gonna do it probably on your own with all of the people in your own community. You're probably gonna have to bring in a lot of people from outside, and even the code itself is coming from a lot of different places. So this idea of sovereignty, of digital sovereignty, will always require a lot of outside labor, a lot of outsiders involved. And so Animikii, we pretty much focus exclusively on software. So we have our own system to basically do this in our own way to help reduce some of these digital dependencies. And one of the big things is just starting the process without just like jumping in and building software right away. We have to really understand why we're doing this, like what it is that we're trying to achieve, like what's the impact of the software that we're gonna build. Like, before we even do a line of code, we spend sometimes up to months just talking with our partners and sussing out, is this even a good idea to do this or not? So, and then that's just the software level. Like, when it comes to any kind of information infrastructure or any kind of digital, anything really, like everything from the software that requires, like, built on code, and that code requires a programming language. It's all based on these operating systems and hardware and data centers, and then the internet infrastructure, which we're talking about today. All of these different levels, oh, wrong slide. These are all different potential pathways of other dependencies we could fall into. And so anything digital that inherently requires all these things, we also have to be very careful about all of these new pathways that new colonial relations could find themselves interfering with us. So that's it for me. I'll pass the mic off. Yeah.
Aloha. My name is Pu'onu Bumpy Kanalehe. I'm the head of state, the president of the nation of Hawaii. I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Mark, for making this happen. What does it mean to have digital sovereignty? You know, we have a history, a long history, over 30 years actually. The nation was created back in 1995 after a law that was passed by the United States in 1993. It was an apology to Native Hawaiians for basically destroying our islands, destroying our Hawaii. And that history is important because then when it comes up to digital sovereignty, it made it easier for us to actually let people know about that. To me, digital sovereignty today is pushing the limits of possibilities, going beyond that in every sense of the word. We've done a lot of work since that, and I was on a Sovereignty Advisory Commission in 1993 for the state of Hawaii, and I had the opportunity to be on an international law committee that actually my job was to go out. After the law passed in 1993, my job was to go out and find solutions of our problem in the international arena. And when they passed the apology law in 1993, in November 23rd, I brought in an international lawyer who practices in Champaign, Illinois University, Francis Buell, and he basically came to Hawaii, and his opinion was, now that the United States had finally admitted to what they had done to the Hawaiian people, the Hawaiian people have the right to restore their independence, to restore the independence of Hawaii. So it may not seem that way right now, but the state of Hawaii is basically illegal, and the military occupation of Hawaii is in existence as we speak right now. And so when we had the opportunity to create our own ISP in our village, the only sovereign land in Hawaii. We have 45 acres of land that we had the opportunity to meet with Mark at that time, with the Internet Society. And what was funny is because we resist the government. Believe me, we resist the government in Hawaii. And it was the hardest time was to break through the state and a federal government bureaucracy. But when Mark and Internet Society came to Hawaii, they basically worked with the state of Hawaii, got introduced to us, and that is what brought the state to actually give us some kind of recognition of what we were doing. And so we ended up setting up our, we did our trenching, laid the wires, the fiber optic, brought that in, went through training. It was a good training too. The whole village went and done that. But it actually brought all the work that we had done prior to that into a real, more of a reality for us. We could actually reach out to further to other communities, other countries in the world about our situation. But what it really meant to us was, how do we utilize this, digital world now to further building our country. It's a nation building thing that we see in digital sovereignty. It really has, like you were saying about what you're doing, your work you're doing. It really has, for us, it has meat. It's kind of like, it's like building a country in a metaverse, because we're right because of the legal foundation, but something is not right with the picture, don't look right, And so I think metaverse has no jurisdiction, which, throughout the day I was listening to everybody talking, and I was thinking, why don't you just build that in a metaverse? All the solutions there, get it all solved in that space, and draw down what you can in reality, what you can use and what you can utilize. Because nobody will be able to tell you, no, you can't do that, It's kind of like nation building. No, you can't do that. We don't take no for an answer. And so it's, I think that's the way that digital sovereignty has actually opened up our minds and how to build our nation out, how to build out that whole thing. So, I don't know how much you folks know of our history, but check out our site, Hawaii Nation, nationofhawaii.org, And you'll find a lot of information, like very good, valuable information there. Some of the work we've done. We've traveled all over the world to open up peace and friendship relations, which we had, over 100 years ago. We had over 30 treaties with different countries. So we're proud of that, and we're using digital sovereignty to actually make that all work out in that world or this. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zack Frawley. I work with the Assembly of First Nations. I'm not Sasha Labois today, but I'll do my best. That was a great question, Mark. I think when you look at digital sovereignty, a key part of that is the sovereignty aspect. And some things that you could take from that sovereignty is that recognition of jurisdiction and that recognition of control over processes, and for my line of work, in First Nations. And so when you expand it and you include that digital sovereignty aspect, it's again that jurisdiction and that control over digital components within a First Nation, and whether that's physical or, as mentioned, in the metaverse or online. And at the AFN, to provide a little bit of a background, we are an advocacy group that advocates for First Nations across Canada, and our mandates come from First Nations in Assembly, and one of them that has recently passed was to talk about spectrum sovereignty. And again, it touches on that sovereignty aspect and the importance of that recognition of jurisdiction and control on First Nations for spectrum access. And I know we'll talk about it a lot this week, I'm sure, but within those processes and within that mandate that we have, it is the, I want to say the lack of co-development and the involvement of First Nations in the current frameworks within the government to license out spectrum to First Nations or across Canada. And when they are licensing it, it is licensing that spectrum within a First Nation without that consultation or that co-development. And so when you look at that spectrum sovereignty aspect, it's that need to have that First Nations involvement and having that First Nation gain the benefits of that spectrum licensing process, and whether that's through their own processes or through that co-development, as I mentioned before. And with that, I think that's what comes to mind right away when you say digital sovereignty.
Thanks for that. That's really good. Bumpy, one of the things that I've heard you talk about a fair bit is around what it means for your community to be sovereign and what it takes for your community to be sovereign. You're using traditional methods for purifying water. You're taking control of all aspects of, if you're going to run your own country, you need to do everything. And I remember you telling me about how that includes broadband, how that includes ensuring everyone has internet access. And that's always stuck with me. My next question is, how do you reconcile the very nature of the internet, which is global, open, interconnected networks, with the concept of sovereignty, of having a piece of it, because technically the way the internet works, you can't partition off part of the internet. The internet's designed so that traffic will just route around you, right? So I guess my question is, how do you reconcile sovereignty in a world that is designed to be open and free?
I have a really kind of grim answer to that, but I don't know if I want to jump into that right away. But it's like, as I articulated with all these different kind of potential pathways to another form of colonial dependency, it's always something to be cognizant of, because it's like the very nature of anything digital will inherently require some form of capitalism, like involving an economy that you have no agency over. Like, you're playing the colonial game by making money. Like, it's their money, you know, the queen or king now, I guess, right? Like, to pay for all this digital stuff, to pay for all these, the hardware, the software, all these things that like you can't just make on your own. Like, you just can't. And so extending that into the layers of the internet, again, you look at the pathways of where the actual internet, like, tubes are running in the grounds, like, you trace the history, the legacy of that infrastructure, I can assure you it's not pretty. And not only that, it can be shut down very quickly and very easily. There's a lot of choke points on the internet at all of those layers I described. Everything from like the chips, which are made in very few places in very few countries, to the tubes in the grounds, to the hardware and the software, like all of these different layers are vulnerabilities as well that all countries are nervous about, not just indigenous peoples, right? And so when you're thinking about the power relations already involved in colonization, and adding those things in on also this technology these technologies will be further, I don't know, it's, again, I don't have a great happy answer to this. It's just like, I mean, there's case studies in the world all over the place about worst case scenario of when, you know, like the infrastructure is destroyed, and then all of a sudden the dependency that you had to even reach the rest of the world. What do you do? Like, Palestine is the obvious example right now of there's been times where like the ISPs were just bombed, you know? And there's nothing to stop horrors like that happening here in a lot of different ways. So these are just the things that, like, I don't know. Again, grim answer, sorry to bring the mood down, but something worth considering.
No. That's why I brought up the metaverse. It has no jurisdiction. And if you build it there, you probably could find all the solutions in the world for what you're thinking of is a problem in this system as we see it. And this is why we lean towards looking at that. When we went to Asia, see, we set up a central bank in Asia. And so my thoughts was, well, how are we going to get around the government, right? The government that exists right now. And so I kept telling them, what if we build it in a metaverse? Just build it in a metaverse. We can do the blockchain thing, you go from there, come back in reality, and you know, that is, to me, how we could use digital sovereignty. And, but that's in the works right now. I think it's fine tuning that. See, we have a legal foundation to go upon this, that's why. And that's the difference that we in Hawaii would have probably on everybody else that would try to do the same thing. Kind of like a sacrificial lamb, you know. Just do it, make it happen. Because we have the right to. That's a reconciliation process that never happened over 30 years, and nothing has happened on the government side but trying to exterminate us by federal recognition. Nothing to take away from federal recognition, but for the Hawaiian people, that's not good. When they take away that nationality from you, that's the beginning of extermination. You don't have to be wiped out physically in the world to face extermination. All you need to do is give up your nationality, and that's the end of that. And so that we refused to. And so the only things we could think of was things that people dream about. Well, the metaverse is, is a dream state as well. And so I think that opened the eyes of the people in Asia, how we could set up something like that and move forward. They still think it's just a game, which is started off that way. But think about it, you could set up, a lot of programs. You could set up your fundraisers, you could set up everything there and attract attention, which would attract everything else we're talking about, jobs and all that stuff. So I think there's a possibility there. Like I said, it means pushing the limits of possibilities.
Yeah, and I'd like to build off the comment about possibilities and ask all of you, how can, I'm trying to frame the question. I didn't have that question prepared, so I'm trying to frame it in my head, but how can the digital world be used? How can the internet, the digital world, the infrastructure be used to advance sovereignty?
I think we're using it already to advance what we're doing. But on a global state, we have an advantage. We had, like I said, we had treaties with over 30 countries. And to reopen that treaties in real time by putting it in a metaverse might be holding everybody accountable and get everybody educated, on our situation. But also the solutions. Our elders told us that the world going to be looking for world peace, and they're coming to Hawaii. Because Hawaii has the key, and the key is aloha. And I think we got stuck with that, our generation, to uphold what the elders wanted, to make happen. So it was like, myself, John, our team was sitting down one day, and they said, well, why don't we just put world peace there, that's the solution for the world, and go backwards and create everything else, And I think that is how we can use internet, systems and globally too,
I mean, I have some answers, but I'm not going to broadcast them over the internet right now. In terms of actively fighting colonization, internet has a weird contradictory role because it's on one hand, as I said, we don't control the tubes in the ground, but at the same time, we can still use them to fight back. There's a lot of different ways to do that, and again, you don't, this is being broadcast live, so I'm not going to give no hints, but it's just everything from social media to Twitter to just showing what's happening. And connecting. One of the biggest things that colonization has always done has been to disassociate and dispossess us from ourselves and each other. And one of the powerful things of indigeneity as a concept is it's a uniting principle of people that have been oppressed through colonization. That's something that gives us something in common. And the ability for us to connect over the internet and share stories and to be on panels like this, to collaborate, to do our own thing away from the colonial gaze, that is a lot of power, and that scares certain people that don't want that to happen. They don't want us to have any kind of unity, across our movements, across our nations, across our peoples. They don't want us to build power separately out of their systems. And so as long as we can kind of hijack the internet for our own purposes, to collaborate, I think we can build that kind of strength and unity. We just have to be real careful how we do it,
I think my answer will touch more on that infrastructure component of the digital sovereignty. And touching back to what I said initially on that, that need to recognize that jurisdiction and control of digital processes on First Nations, and it's really providing an avenue for that First Nation that wants to be involved in that internet landscape through things such as capacity development, project funding, and areas like that, to allow for them to create their own infrastructure networks, or for them to control, once again, that spectrum access to use in their own way. And I think when we start to see that, that power back to the First Nations when it comes to connecting to the internet to reach the more digital side of things, you'll start to see that current connectivity level that we have in Canada, at least, which is low for First Nations, very low. You'll start to see that rise as we give the power to the community.
Excellent. And we have a few minutes left, so if anyone has any questions, please go up to the mic in the center of the room. This has been a really interesting conversation. This is fascinating stuff. I think this could go on all night. Yeah. Oh, Dara has a question. Is that there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Okay. Well, I want to jump ahead to tomorrow a little bit and talk a little bit more about spectrum, especially for Jeff and Bumpy. You are both sovereignty warriors up there and have a very interesting grasp on what sovereignty actually means in the context of digital equity and beyond. So I'm just curious what the term spectrum sovereignty means to you in a robust way when we're talking about Indigenous communities.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's a lot of way, like, you know way more about this than I do. But it's like, I think about spectrum. I'm careful to think about spectrum not in that kind of resource language. Resource language always makes me real nervous because it does create this kind of like idea that it's like this inert thing that's out there for the taking, that can be owned, that can be controlled, possessed, all these kinds of things. But at the same time, like, just as we have rights to and relations and responsibilities to land, water, creation, all the things, spectrum is part of that. You know, like in Haudenosaunee culture, our Thanksgiving address may not specifically say spectrum, but I'm pretty sure some traditional folks could think about it and be like, yeah, the things that we give thanks to as part of the quote-unquote natural world, like spectrum falls within that. Thus, we have rights to that. We have responsibilities to that. We've always had that as part of our way of living. And so if that's the case, then it's not like this is new to us. Like this idea of transmitting things over the air through whatever, like it's just, the technologies have changed, you know? And so how do we basically like use the technologies of today that also still respect those basic guiding principles that all of our cultures have, and figure out where they align with things like this. So it's just like, that's like a kind of high level, kind of like lofty way of saying it, but on a more kind of practical means, it's like, again, the more avenues we have to reduce any kind of digital dependency, including raw infrastructure, not having to depend on Starlink, like not having to depend on an obvious colonizer who literally is like, hi, I'm going to colonize Mars. And anyway, so any kind of chance that we have to gain more agency over any of the like means of transmitting data over the internet, including spectrum, like we should take it very, very seriously.
Yeah, I can delve a little more into that spectrum sovereignty and what the AFN has been doing. Again, to touch on that resolution that we passed and that mandate that we have, it's that recognition of spectrum as that natural resource that kind of becomes enabling First Nations to really treat it as that that right and that source that they inherently have rights over, and it is touched on in elements of the or articles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP, in terms of processes like free prior informed consent, where the processes now that are happening on First Nations without their involvement and without their possibly without their knowledge at all and their consent, it really creates that space where the First Nations need to be involved in that process and gain that that hold on their rights and able to use it in the way that they want to use it and gain benefits from it in the way that they see fit. And we'll talk about it more. Oh, I won't talk about it, but it'll be talked about more this week, and how that process is in Canada, and the current ideas for the First Nations roles in that. But I think when you talk about sovereignty, it's that, again, that idea that it's the First Nations who need to have that, that say in those processes and have that control over spectrum within their First Nations.
So, so the islands, we have a, I don't know how many of you heard of this 200-mile exclusive economic zone. So back in 1994, our proclamation did cover that area that we reclaimed and our right to a 200-mile exclusive economic zone. That means that 200 miles out in the ocean, up in the sky, and down in the ground. The revenues that pass through, whether it's technology, spectrum, transportation, airlines, shipping through the ocean, there's a big amounts of money that come to, not directly to Hawaii, first to the federal government, but that belongs to our people through that 200-mile EEZ. And so I'm going further than just talking about what exists today and the problems we have with that, but going back to what we reclaimed back in 1994. And I think that is stance on that.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question.
The internet is a double-edged sword. I mean, you have to be very careful. The thing is that when people want to give misinformation, it can be used in that way. The thing is that what we have to realize, you mentioned colonization, stuff like that. To me, they stole from us. They stole from us. If you look at the medical industry, the majority of the medicines come from indigenous knowledge. You think about it. The American government is based on the Iroquois Confederacy. That is traditional knowledge. And the thing is that people don't realize that. The thing is that a lot of the things that were taken from us, the doctrine of discovery determines that Terra Nova, or Novus, no one's land. But they didn't realize that there was indigenous people here. And, those are the things that we need to start fighting. The thing is that, and you're absolutely right, when you give up your identity, you give up your culture, you give up your language, then you're defeated, you're destroyed. And I think that's what you guys are doing is very good. But to me also, we have to know that there is, a possibility of them using stuff against us. But I mean, we should look at all these things that they've stolen from us and trying to get that back, especially from the medical industry. The thing is that I'll tell you a quick story about my grandmother. My brother, he was driving a motorcycle and he injured his leg. And the doctors looked at it and they tried to repair his leg. And they decided, we're going to amputate his leg. We'll give you a week to think about it. He went to my grandmother, and my grandmother looked at his leg and he says, what's wrong with your leg? And he explained, they're going to amputate my leg. She says, let me look at it. She looked at it. She says, I'm going to ask you one question. This determines whether or not I'm going to treat you. And he said, okay, what's the question? Do you believe I can cure you? He said, yes. Then she says, I'll treat you. But she says, I'm going to get a medicine. And she said, it's going to cure your leg. And she said, the doctors are going to beg you to tell what I used, because they say, we'll make you rich beyond your dreams. She says, you do not tell them what I did. Because once they know, they have no use for you. They'll get rid of you, and they're the ones that will become rich. She treated him, she cured him. And the doctors did exactly what she said. They wanted to know what medicine she used. And he explained to them, my grandmother told me that this was going to happen. I can't tell you. But I mean, that's how traditional knowledge is very important to us. And the thing is that we have to be very cautious when it comes to sharing our information. We only share what we want people to know. And that's the long and short of it.
Excellent. Thank you. We would have time for a very quick response if you have one, or not. Yeah?
Everything you said, the double-edged nature of all things digital. I mean, it both can empower, but it can also entrap. And with data, and that knowledge that we have to protect, our data is sacred. And just because it's digitized, that doesn't reduce the sacredness of it. We have that sacred responsibility to our information, our knowledges, all of the things about us. And the thing that really irks me right now is artificial intelligence, large language models. Artificial intelligence. The very nature of colonial technologies is always to steal. It's always to dispossess. It's always to enclose, put in a little box, put a label on it and sell it to somebody else. And anytime that we adopt any technology that is inherently built with that ideology in mind, how much are we inadvertently dispossessing ourselves, again, of our own knowledges? And so I caution everyone very much about large language models right now, because the way they're very designed is to steal our data, to steal our knowledge, to steal our wisdom, repackage it and sell it back to us broken. And then the next generation of youth that it's been dispossessed, they'll have those little bits of information from a large language model that's not even, quote, pure or even correct anymore. And that's what they're going to base their culture on. That's what they're going to base their ideologies on. That's what they're going to base their connection to indigeneity will be on something that's already been broken, scattered, and then put back together by a machine that doesn't understand it. That is not good. So I'll just leave it at that.
yeah, that brings us to time, and I'd like to thank the panelists. This was an excellent discussion, and thank you for your questions.